Welcome, everyone, once again to the Irish NFL show. As the show says, it's about the free agency frenzy. And helping me sum up the first week of craziness, as always, Colin Cronin, Brian O'Leary. Good evening, gents.
Evening. The rounding out a 4-day weekend, and it has been a great weekend. It has been a great weekend for some teams in the NFL, and it's been an interesting weekend for others, which I'm sure we're going to get into.
When we wrapped up last Tuesday evening, we made some predictions around players going to certain places which didn't materialise, and the last 3 or 4 days has just been crazy in this crazy world of free agency.
Guys, I mean, St. Patrick, as we all know, is the patron saint not only of Ireland, but of Nigeria, Montserrat, and also of NFL free agency, because it's always Paddy's week that the craziness transpires. But I'll give you another Irish Connections free agency. Bring you back to the 1980s for a second. So just imagine, Michael's not even an illicit thought in his parents' eyes at that stage. Colin is there, a cheruby little toddler with lovely rosy cheeks. And Brian is there, a mature teenager already looking for a pint. And back in the 80s, you had there a famous incident where Charles Corhey's expression was kind of, it was paraphrased by Conor Cruz O'Brien, and we bought the term GUBU. And GUBU stands for grotesque, unprecedented, bizarre, and unbelievable. And gentlemen, we have had the grotesque behavior of teams pimping themselves out to try to get a piece of Deshaun Watson. The unprecedented behavior in terms of a massive trade for a non-quarterback and Devontae Adams with an unbelievable contract to go with it. The bizarre behavior of the Jags thinking Christian Kirk deserves to be paid like a number one wide receiver. And of course, the Colts didn't have to give up anything. In fact, they got draft picks to get rid of Carson Wentz's ridiculous contract. And then, of course, the unbelievable nature that every player in the whole entire universe wants to now play in the AFC West. And it's quickly become the American League East of the NFL. I know we will touch on all of these. We will touch on the totality of free agency on top of the two shows we've done already this week. But guys, we've got to start with what is, quite frankly, the biggest quarterback contract, the biggest quarterback trade, potentially up there of all time. Herschel Walker is the only other player that's ever been traded for 3 first-round picks. That didn't work out too well for the Vikings back in the day. But Colin, where do you start with the Deshaun Watson trade to the Cleveland Browns?
Well, I think you have to start with everything that surrounds it, right? Because I don't believe you can look at this purely in a footballing sense. The reality is that Deshaun Watson, whilst he isn't facing criminal charges, he is still has 22 accusations of sexual misconduct against him. We don't know, what way that is essentially going to play out. Everybody has kind of been sitting on it, and they know. Like, the reality is, the Browns know there is a suspension coming, and they have facilitated this by reducing his contract in the first year. I think that is probably the grubbiest thing on the Brown side of it. We knew that the criminal charges were unlikely, and the civil cases will have to get worked out. When the league will take action, it remains to be seen. They don't seem to want to do that, but we know in the past Ben Roethlisberger has faced suspension. We know that others have as well. So we've seen a lot over the weekend. I think Greg Rosenthal had a really good piece where he talked about how, teams were going out of their way to make themselves attractive to Deshaun Watson, but Deshaun Watson wasn't speaking or explaining his side of things at all. We have seen Mina Kimes have a really good podcast, and we have seen others respond to the Browns' press release earlier today saying they had done their due diligence. But then apparently nobody spoke to the lawyer for the 22 women. So you wonder what kind of due diligence was done. But, given that we are on the side of the Atlantic where there's a fit and proper test to own a Premier League club, and we all know how that works, it seems that similar sort of due diligence may have been done by the Browns. So it just doesn't feel that all I think has to be part of it. We've seen some long-term Browns fans express extreme disappointment. So I think that's all part of it. And I mean, there is obviously the footballing side that we will get onto, but I don't think you can ignore everything else that goes with this trade.
I think Colin has summed up the off-the-field stuff very well, so I suppose I'm going to step away from that part. I think the process itself and how it played out over the last week was unusual in the sense that he went off. It was strange, because I said to Colin last week, after everything that's gone on, he's the guy holding all the cards at the end of this. He was the one meeting with the Falcons, meeting with the Saints, returning to meet with the Saints again, which then started to look like it was going to be them. And then the Browns had obviously made their case as to why they want him. He was then declaring the Browns out as someone he didn't want to go to. And it seemed to be them between the Falcons and the Saints. And then obviously then come Friday evening, we get the news that he's decided to reverse his decision on the Browns, which a lot of people are saying is a lot down to the fact of the contract, which was an offer, which, as you touched on, Mark, earlier on, was astronomical. And it wasn't anything like what the Falcons and the Saints are putting on the table. From a footballing point of view, the fact that he's gone into the AFC, for me, kind of cements the fact that I think it is more contract and financially related, because he's gone into a conference which we've said is packed. It's only got even busier with the recent trade of Russell Wilson going in there, which makes this division in the West is going to be so competitive. And you'd think he would have more of a free reign and a free run in terms of being with a team that could potentially go towards the Super Bowl in the Saints, I felt, because I still feel they're a strong side. But the Browns are right back in you'd have to expect the Browns to be right back in the hunt next year and going up against a team that's just been to the Super Bowl in the division. And from the suspension point of view, it is coming. And I think that was even more evident yesterday when they took in Jacoby Brissett, because whilst he's not the quarterback that we saw when he was with the Patriots early on in his career in terms of running around, I still think he kind of fits that offense around what they'll put in for Deshaun Watson. And I think they've already kind of put him in place, because he will be the one, inevitably playing those 5 or 6 games, and they've moved Case Keenum on in the meantime.
Yeah, and you say as Case Keenum's already moved on, there is a far more fascinating domino still to fall, though, which is, I mean, we talked a little bit, maybe not a lot, about where's Jameis Winston going to end up? Where's Jimmy Garoppolo going to end up? And now, a very interesting question, where is Baker Mayfield going to end up? Colts. But still, that may be an interesting domino that left for. I mean, guys, it's very rare that we've still got such intrigue around the quarterback position a week into free agency. Usually they're the first ones to fall off, but now different things keep triggering. We can't really say it's very clear who is going to be starting where and how. Also, where does this leave the Steelers? Like they've been loading up on guns. The AFC North is maybe just as powerful at the moment as the AFC West, but Baker's being treated pretty shabbily by this whole process. I mean, he was injured. He was flying through an injury last week. No, Brian, do you not want to see him at the Giants?
I've made my feelings on Baker Mayfield very clear throughout the course of the season and in the off season. I don't want him coming to the Giants. Now, look, I still think that's not fair against the Browns a possibility, but he wouldn't be for me. You touched on there, the Colts Seahawks are in play, but I mean, I found it a bit strange that he made it very clear and very transparent. They're in on Deshaun Watson. He then obviously takes it out and puts out his own personal press release to say, I've been not dealt with here well, and I want away. He didn't formally put in the request for the trade until the following day after the statement. And then they were out on the Deshaun Watson thing, because obviously the Watson camp had said, no, Cleveland isn't for us. And then they backtracked a little bit on Baker, said, no, we're not going to give you your wishes and trade you, which was a bit embarrassing, really. And then 24 hours later, they will probably let him go now. So now I guess it's more about the value and where they see, because they have to give them away so much now. I think they will hold fire until the lead up to the draft and try to get as much from one team. But I'm not sure what the value is. I saw Michael Lombardi, but now he feels they'll be looking for a day 2 pick, which is a second round or a third round. again, I'm not sure. Maybe Colin will give us Tupman's word on what he thinks the value is, because he knows how I feel about the quarterback.
Yeah. I mean, Colin, come on. Compared to the Colts, who must have thought they'd have to give something to get rid of Wentz, now they're looking around and saying, we got some extra picks. Seattle, we're in the market for a quarterback. Like, it's still going to be people interested in Baker Mayfield and reclaiming him.
Maybe, but it's been a slow market thus far. We haven't talked about the other QB who's really badly treated, and that's Matt Ryan, who, in fairness to Matt Ryan, came into a really bad situation at the Falcons when Michael Vick was, arrested, convicted of dog fighting, and put that franchise really in a mess. Matt Ryan, who has really gone about his business in a very professional way, even in the midst of the Falcons going out and trying to get Watson. And we saw the Falcons Twitter. I don't know if people saw that, but the eye emoji yesterday, and that was it. But I hope for fans, because I've seen a lot of talk over the past few days about loyalty and players not being loyal and this and that. Players, why would they be? I mean, they can do everything they can. In fairness to Matt Ryan, he had a pretty good year last year, given that he didn't have Julio Jones, he didn't have Ridley, and he got Gage paid, who's now probably going to go on to put up serious numbers under Brady. But Matt Ryan, has now had all this to contend with. What do the Falcons ultimately do? Do they try running it back with Matt Ryan and try to repair that? So the knock-on impacts on all of this, when you openly flirt with another QB, what is that going to do to your locker room, and what's that going to do to the team dynamics? There's a lot to play out over the next little while, I think.
Ryan is due a contractual bonus of, I think it's just short of 8 million, which is due to be paid tomorrow based on the dates within the contract. So I imagine if they had got Watson last week, they would have quickly looked to either ship him in a trade somewhere else or potentially even release him. So
well, they had pushed that. That's
right. Yeah.
The Falcons thought they were getting Deshaun Watson, so they pushed this Matt Ryan one. We saw obviously Kyle Pitts shares the same agent, tweeted and deleted. So yeah, it's been quite the grubby few days for the league and for a lot of people involved.
So you're saying that Matt Ryan agreed to that extension of that bonus as well. He had to consent to it. So he has done more than his bit for Falcons. And I know if you're a fan in the NFC South and you're a Buccaneers fan, it's not been a bad start to the season of 2022 really for you, considering your quarterback is now sorted. The Falcons are in disarray. The Saints still don't have a quarterback or a head coach. Well, they've got a head coach, but they don't have Sean Payton anymore. So some divisions have, changed. Say Blue changed,
and the Panthers are in flux as well.
Well, I mean, I wasn't even going to mention the burning inferno going on there. But gentlemen, I mean, and sorry to everybody listening. Obviously, please feel free. Please do throw in your comments, whether on Twitter or on YouTube, etc. On YouTube, we can display them here. On Twitter, we'll take time to read them all out. Fred, the hangovers are all right, but actually, Fred put up another comment that we flashed up there. The Browns should be shunned, lads. There were a lot of teams, let's be honest, the Saints and the Falcons we were mentioning, who were desperate to get Deshaun Watson into the fold and will make excuses of the circumstances surrounding it, but certainly leaves a bitter taste in the mouths of many fans and people. But if he starts winning, I guarantee you Browns fans and Cleveland will forgive him for any and all indiscretions. But for me, the bit the guy can't get over is teams are prostituting themselves to Deshaun Watson. What was he saying, doing, kind of to sell himself to the teams? And we talk about the Browns wanted an adult, apparently. I'm not too sure they've got one there. But we shall move on. Gentlemen, we're always very grateful to our sponsors, Trust Gaming, MiniSystemsArcade.com, and the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. And we're grateful for them because with them, we grow. We all grow together. It's a fantastic symbiotic relationship. You would have thought that the relationship, therefore, between a quarterback and a wide receiver, especially when they help each other so much, would be similarly symbiotic. But apparently, some wide receivers, regarded as the best in the league, don't want to play with their quarterback anymore, even when they're offered more money to stay with their current team. In fact, they just love their old quarterback at Fresno College so much that they want to play for the Las Vegas Raiders. Gentlemen, we could talk about the Buffalo Bills giving 6 years and $120 million to a 33-year-old pass rusher, but we could also talk about the mega trade and mega deal for Davante Adams going to the Las Vegas Raiders. Several key picks involved, obviously, but also a lot of money, though apparently not as much money as the Packers wanted to give him. So, Aaron Rodgers, you got paid, but you now no longer have your security blanket. Gents, let's break it down. I mean, how is this going to affect the balance of power, the shift of power between in those divisions, but also between the Packers and the Raiders, and what it means, obviously, going into the draft? Colin?
Well, I suppose the interesting thing was, it was very unexpected, right? When the franchise tag was placed on Adams, the expectation was that they were going to get a deal done, especially with looking at Rodgers' contract and the likelihood that, the expectation that he was probably going to be there for another few years, though Andrew Brandt still says he thinks that he only has one more year there. But there had been a lot of talk last week about how Davante Adams wanted to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame when he retired, and that the best way to go about that was to continue to play with Aaron Rodgers, given the connection that they have. Now, he decided against that, but he decided against that not for more money, but because he was interested in going to Las Vegas to play with the Raiders in a stacked AFC West, you would have to say. So an interesting one, because when you consider the NFC North, you would have to say that despite the moves that have been made in some of the other teams, and the Bears looking in better shape than they have in quite a while, and the Vikings under a new head coach, and Detroit, well, trying, but it's still going to take a long time to sort that out. You would say that surely the Packers had an easier path to the division, to a conference championship, to a potential Super Bowl, but Adams decided against all that. So he brings his considerable talents to the AFC West. It's going to be very interesting, because ultimately I think it puts a good bit of pressure on Derek Carr to produce now. But in fairness, and I have been a massive critic of him in the past, given what he did in Denver, but Josh McDaniels doesn't seem to be making the same sort of mistakes that he did the first time around as head coach. So he gets one of the most talented wide receivers in the game. He's on a big deal, sure, but if you want to score points, you got to have it. So they have given Carr an extra weapon. Hunter Renfrow, Waller, and now Davante Adams. They are seriously stacked in terms of that receiving core.
When the trade went through, we took time to kind of, I suppose, get our heads around it. I was actually thinking back to that wildcard game, and I remember on the Monday after, we felt that the Raiders were close to winning, and we discussed that last drive and the mistakes made by Carr. But throughout the course of that game, Chase was the difference for Burrow. And we were saying in that game, if the Raiders had an explosive wide receiver downfield, it could have been very different. They've addressed that now. But it's for the Packers. It's all about the Packers for me, because I think they're trying to save face here. There was an article saying, Rodgers was aware of what was going on before he signed the contract. Don't buy into that. They said they've offered him more money. I don't buy into that either, because at the end of the show, and usually me and Colin felt that there was more changes on the way for the Packers. We've seen so much on Monday and Tuesday last week of how they were getting themselves in place in terms of players being released, players signing contracts. And it was more around the fact that they needed to get things shored up before they gave Rodgers that contract. And we said it's going to consume so much of the cap, something's going to have to give. And what's given is arguably their best player outside of Rodgers, going on, okay, fine, he's gone to where he wants to go. But the V's, he could have said no. It wasn't like he had a clause in the contract that was specific to where he could go. So for me, I think they've realised we can't pay everybody. And then he was coming out with the stuff around the fact that he wasn't going to play on the tag, which leaves them in the position, if he was to follow that through, where would they be now coming next season? I think now they've given a first round and a second round. They could potentially use that first round on a wide receiver, because there is 6 or 7 really, really aggressive wide receivers in terms of who's going to be out there come April in the draft. But will he be able to step in immediately and build that relationship with Rodgers and the chemistry to get them to where they need to be? I still think the Packers will be fine, because I think the division is too inconsistent. I think the Vikings probably realistically are the only team that can challenge them, and they've got a new head coach in, and we've seen throughout the years that they're such a yo-yo side that you just never know what you're going to get from them. So the Packers will be fine, but I don't know whether it'll put them in a situation where they'll be back in the championship game, but we'll see.
Well, the Vikings have brought back Kirk Cousins, of course, Brian. So, I mean, they're secure at the quarterback position. And I know how strongly you feel about Kirk Cousins. So, just want to...
With a contract extension, yeah. Well, to roll money into him the following year, but he's still got...
As they kind of had to with the original deal he did with the first ever fully guaranteed quarterback deal in NFL history over a multi-year basis. So, he sets records wherever he goes. In fact, I think I remember reading at one stage, like, Kirk Cousins over his career has made 4 times more money than Dan Marino or John Elway or something like that. It was just it's a bizarre stat. Obviously, the money going into the game is ridiculous, but you would definitely put them in different categories as players. But let's just stay with this, as I mentioned at the start, this AFC West, which is absolutely stacked. And let's stick with the Raiders at the moment still as well, because it's not just the Devontae Adams move. I mean, they traded Ngakoue to the Colts in return for Rock Ya-Sing. But then in return for that, they're kind of like, well, what are you going to do at pass rush? Oh, I'll tell you what, we'll pick up Chandler Jones to pair up opposite Max Crosby there to create a really compelling pass rush. And they might need it because weapons abound. Juju Smith-Schuster going to the Chiefs, etc. The Broncos might have upgraded at quarterback position. I might have missed that one in the mix column. But also, we talked about some of the big splashy moves. The Chargers, J.C. Jackson, on the biggest cornerback deal of the free agency period. I mean, dealing with the Raiders, but dealing with all these other moves going on in this division, this particular division at the time. Colin, I know we're not going to know for a few months. We're not going to know till after the draft. We're not going to know after mini camps and everything smooth itself out. But you got to be getting excited now. I mean, I know it's several months out, but this looks like epic games ahead all throughout that division.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it lives up to it, right? Because ultimately it has the potential to go back. And I was very young to properly appreciate it, but reading up on it, Brian might remember the NFC East back in 1990 and 91 was absolutely incredible, just phenomenal battles between those teams, but ultimately they came. Whoever emerged was battle hardened, So that would, I suppose, be the hope. And I know Field Yates put a tweet out early, I think last week, saying Monday Night Football announced, and weeks 1 to 8 was AFC West. And as the week went on, it became less and less outlandish because all of these trades kind of kept happening. And yeah, it definitely, there was talk early in the week as well. Maybe the Raiders were looking at kind of the Broncos bringing in Wilson and what the Chargers were doing, and the Chiefs already kind of being so stacked, and maybe they'd kind of sit on their hands and assess of no, they decided no, they're going all in as well. So yeah, you would have to say that the Chiefs bringing in Juju is a good move for them. It should be, because they've really lacked that an additional weapon, and obviously with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, they remain the team to beat. I am as big a Justin Herbert fan as I think exists, but I am into a Mike Williams. I'm not a fan of that move. I get maybe why they felt they had to do it. I just I think there were other options out there. I think, and we'll probably touch on it later, you saw, say, Allen Robinson go. I think there were other options available to the Chargers, and I think they still got to find a way to stop the run. But yeah, I think everybody, in fairness, around the league looks at the AFC West and goes, that'll be very enjoyable. Not sure I'd really like to be part of it.
But I think the one thing I would say with the 4 teams and what they've done is I don't think there's any, like maybe you'll say it differently, I don't think there's any panic signings. Like everybody who's been brought into teams, we're all in positions of need. The Raiders needed a good, really top-end wide receiver. They needed someone to complement Crosby. They got and done that. The Broncos needed a quarterback. The Broncos have done quite well in the other signings, like DJ Jones, I thought was really good. Singleton was a surprise for me. Didn't think he had the best seasons with the Eagles. And then you got the Chiefs, and I suppose Colin has touched on it. They're probably in the best position, and lots of them just complement the team. The Chiefs lost Pringle, who's kind of an underrated wide receiver for him over the past few years. He's gone to Chicago. So once I saw that happen, I felt they would move in on on Juju. So, and then the Chargers last week, we talked about predominantly how it was defense, in particular trying to stop the run last season was really bad for them. They brought in 2 defensive tackles. So they're all addressing, the needs within the team. And right now, I know it's, as you said, Mark, it's so far away, but it's very hard right now. And I genuinely say, I don't think it's a given that the Chiefs win the division or come second next year. I think it's so compelling. I think the first game of the season with the Rams hosting the Super Bowl, winning the Super Bowl, and they're going to be the hosts. I believe the Broncos are due into LA, and I see the Raiders are due into LA. So I think it's a given one of those teams will be opening up the season.
Well, it used to be a little bit of a said thing about the AFC North is that sometimes they beat each other up so much that they'd hurt each other's chances of getting a top seed and sometimes hurt the wild card opportunities of teams within that division. That could very well happen in the AFC West. We've seen the Chiefs march to the number 1 seed a few years in a row. At least that is going to be less viable when you consider 6 games against very, very stacked divisional opponents in this regard.
Well, just a quick one, Mark. We saw it last year, obviously with the extra team in the playoffs, 3 teams from the NFC West went into the playoffs with obviously the Rams winning the Super Bowl. I mean, it's not against the Rams' possibility. These teams are so stacked that they beat all the other teams, and obviously then it plays out against the other. The 4 of them somehow making it.
Maybe steel sharpens steel, and you get those opportunities. But look, as Colin mentions, Monday Night Football. So the new crew, Troy and Joe, have moved from Fox to ESPN. So maybe on Monday Night Football they'll be in Mile High, and in Arrowhead, and in SoFi, on a rotating basis, generally. To watch those games and commentate on them, obviously. But Brian, you mentioned about shoring up weaknesses. We talked a little bit earlier in the week about the Bengals have made a few moves to shore up offensive line weaknesses. I think we all saw quite patently through the playoffs, and obviously you want to protect Joe Burrow there. So they made a few moves already. Just announced about an hour ago there as well, Dallas had cut La'el Collins, but the Bengals have moved quickly to pick him up, also potentially giving them further depth opportunity along the line. Good lineman there. So everybody making their moves to shore up what gaps where they can and take advantage of circumstances and situations of other teams, as inevitably happens. But let's stay in the AFC for a little bit longer, guys. There's a team, they've been there or thereabouts. I mean, last year, you could say the overtime rules didn't really help them, but the Buffalo Bills have been a class act in the conference for the last couple of years. But not quite reaching the promised land yet. They equally, Colin, haven't been quiet in free agency. I wouldn't say it's desperation to make a move in any way, shape, or form, but they're certainly not letting the grass grow under their feet. I mentioned before a certain kind of sizable contract for a 33-year-old pass rusher, but they made some other moves as well, trying to keep pace in the AFC conference.
Yeah, bringing in Von Miller on, but I think Andrew Brandt is right in terms of these deals. You're going to see the headline figure, you're going to see the headline length, but realistically, the vast majority of these deals are kind of two-year deals, maybe 3 years. And for somebody like Von Miller, I suppose there's going to be a premium coming off, a second Super Bowl and the impact that he had. And you heard the Rams players talk about the impact that he had. Yes, Aaron Donald obviously is the phenomenal player, and Aaron Donald is the one who ultimately got to Burrow to prevent him getting the ball out to Chase. But Von Miller was exceptional in the playoffs, and he was exceptional in the Super Bowl. I think that's what the Bills are, bringing him in for. Is the Bills intend to be a powerhouse. They intend on going to the playoffs, and once you get into the dance, sacks change games. That's what you need. Vaughn had a really tough few years because the Broncos couldn't score points. The pass rushers, you need the other team to be taking chances, to actually be throwing the ball. The Broncos were generally behind, so they're just running the ball. But I think you saw from Vaughn, he's not just a pass rusher. He's very good against the run. So for the Bills, they're getting serious pedigree. They also probably needed somebody who has the experience of winning, of getting over the hump. I think that's really important for them. We know they're a very talented team. They came so close last year. They had to do something as well, I think, to kind of change the narrative. The last thing you wanted was to be going into next season just thinking back and going, oh my God, if only we had. So by bringing in, a Von Miller type, somebody who says, look, we've done it before. I've done it before. We can do this. And I think giving Josh Allen an option at tight end, I think that's really important. I do still worry a little bit about their running game. I think that's something that they have to address. We saw Rashad Penny going back to the Seahawks. There's still plenty of running back options out there, and the draft is yet to come. But I have been impressed by the Bills in terms of they've gone out and they've addressed areas of need. And I don't think it's panic. It's about trying to find the final pieces to finally bring them to the promised land.
My only concern on the Von Miller is the consistency of his play, because Colin would know much better than himself, but he was injured at times in Denver towards the end of his career there, and that became kind of an issue. And then during the games itself, after he went for the trade, he wasn't very dominant for quite a while. In fairness, he kind of things came together for the Rams at the right time going into the playoffs, but and he was really disruptive in the playoffs. But leading up to that, he was having what I felt were quieter games than we probably would expect to see more. It reminded me, it's not measurable in terms of the contract or anything, but it reminded me of the TJ Watt signing for Arizona last year. We touched on the fact that they were a team that were on the upward curve and they were just looking to get experienced players in. And I think Colin was right. The Bills they're not far off. They just need a couple of players that are been there, battle tested, have won Super Bowls, and they know what to get. But for me, it's a concern whether he'll stay fifth throughout the course of the season. Is it a 6-year contract, or is it one of those voidables after 2 or 3 years? I suppose we'll never know. Colin touched on the running back. I thought this was a blow last week. McKissick, who's been quite good in Washington, had agreed to go to the Bills. A similar scenario to what we've seen on a couple of days last week, where during the tender period, where players are saying they're going one place only to change their mind. Randy Gregory, obviously, being one of the others who went to Denver. McKissick has changed his mind and he's gone back to Washington, which is a strange move because I thought he would have done well in Buffalo. He's the kind of player that they need just in terms of screen pass, and he can take the ball 15, 20 yards, the kind of plays he was doing for Washington. That was a surprise that they didn't conclude that deal in the end.
Yeah. I think, if I'm being really honest, Brian, I think the Von Miller's really a 3-year deal in terms of the get out after 3 is probably pretty palatable in terms of the structure. But sometimes it's fun to read out the headline items. I'm, of course, delighted to see the Bills strengthening in the AFC East and tightening their hold on that division. It's great to see, but you can't fault them for trying to take the right steps and trying to make the right decisions. Gents, I've got to say, St. Patrick banished the Snakes from Ireland, as we all know so well and everything. And yet, in free agency, it's not sometimes teams banishing players away, but it almost feels like sometimes it's players trying to escape. I don't know, I'm not trying to describe the players of the Snakes, but they're almost more desperate to get away from the teams than the teams are to push them out the door. I'm thinking, of course, of your love of the Chicago One column, who you mentioned earlier, that was finally freed from his incarceration up in Soldier Field. Allen Robinson is a free man. Marcus May seemed like he couldn't wait to get away to the Jets. He's now a Saint, obviously. And even Robert Woods, who, obviously he's had a bit of trouble with injuries, but hoping to get a new lease of life in the Titans, who have taken flyers on 30-year-old wide receivers already, as we saw last year as well. Lots of one-off moves that are all very fascinating in terms of the team-building mechanisms in all these different areas and teams. But maybe on Allen Robinson first, Colin, because I think you've been pleading for his release for about 18 months now at this stage.
Yeah, certainly on this show, I think even longer before that, Matt Nagy, was when I saw like there was talks that maybe, because obviously the Chiefs were looking, it's like he's not going to go and play under Nagy again, given what Nagy subjected him to. I'm delighted for him. I think it's quite telling of his talent that head coach, with the offensive mind of Sean McVay, decides that he's the guy he wants to bring in, and that he's just prepared to let Woods go, and he hasn't got Odell Beckham. So that's, I think, quite telling for me of how highly they rate him. And to pair him with Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford, they've got the deal done. So he's there on a long-term deal. And I think a reasonably team-friendly deal. We heard a lot of talk last week about some QBs would take team-friendly deals. But when you look at the Matt Stafford deal, certainly when I compare it to others, and a guy coming off again a Super Bowl win, I think that's in 2 years' time, in and around 40 million will be like seen as very cheap. So I think smart moves by the Rams. Obviously, they had a bit of money to play with because they didn't get it done with Vaughn. They have also got, and we discussed this on the show, a whole load of compensatory draft picks, and they tend to do very well in the later rounds. So the Rams, for all of the the draft capital they had to give up, they got that Super Bowl ring, and they look like they're well stocked to make another run at it. We know how difficult it is to repeat, but you'd have to be impressed by what they have looked to do this offseason. And yes, I am very excited to see Allen Robinson in that offense and with Matt Stafford throwing him the football.
I feel for Robert Woods in a way, because he's kind of like the odd man out, and it's only down to the fact that he was injured, because last season and the other years he's been quite a good wide receiver, really steady one for him, and a reliable guy. So obviously coming off the injury, there's a report that they are still trying to pursue Odell Beckham to stay and give him the right deal. But I was surprised it was only a fifth rounder, which the Titans had to give up to get him. So it wasn't like they had to give up major capital. He'll come back. If he comes back off his injury, he'd be a solid player for them. Bearing in mind they've now since released Julio Jones. He won't be back in Tennessee next year, so he'd be an interesting one to see where the market is for him. But for Woods, I think he'd be fresh and get a good opportunity. He is going to number one seeds, but it's all about the quarterback there. And yeah, Robinson was always playing it was always at an upper level. It didn't materialize for him last offseason in terms of getting the move with the tag, so he was never going to be back in Chicago. Good move for him, and just puts the Rams back in a strong position again for next season.
I love the Julio Jones kind of rumor mill that's already started out, because I was just in a brief search, and it's like there's Browns websites, Patriots websites, Ravens websites all saying, oh, no, we're definitely going to get Julio Jones. And then multiple people talking from the 49ers, from the Raiders, and my favorite all is the Packers are saying, we have to move on Julio Jones now. I mean, a lot of them are fans' websites. There's not much coming in terms of reported rumors as well. But he's still regarded, obviously, as such a great wide receiver. Injuries have started to take their toll. He isn't what he was, but he still showed he's got plenty to offer in last season with the Titans. So if he can stay healthy, he can definitely add whether a complementary piece or maybe not a leading piece anymore, but definitely a very solid number two to someone else in a great high-powered offense. Gents, I mean, the funny thing is, though, it's never the people that tends to be that spend the money end up lifting Lombardi in due course. Colin, you just mentioned one prime example, Matt Stafford being locked up early on in free agency last year, albeit via a trade. And there are plenty of occasions of obviously teams investing lots of money and coming up with buckets. The infamous Eagles dream team rings true. Vince Young describing it as a dream team back in the day, as you remember. But nobody has spent more money this offseason, I believe I'm right in saying, than the Jacksonville Jaguars. And surely, though, that even though what I just said, I mean, the Jacksonville Jaguars, I mean, that investment's going to pay dividends, of course, because it's been money well spent in a very thoughtful and measured process to have a consistent team building process around their number one pick, Trevor Lawrence. Discuss.
Well, we touched on this a little bit last week. I think essentially the way I view it is there's a premium for Jacksonville to get players to go to Jacksonville, because you're not going to a big market team. So even if, say some of the big market teams might be struggling, over the past couple of years, the Bears, the Giants, right? They're still huge teams with storied histories. You know what you're getting into. You know you'll have the profile. But if you're going to the Jags, you're hoping that Trevor Lawrence could go good. At least you've got a head coach now who, has won a Super Bowl, as opposed to what they were doing last year. But we know that they struggled to sell seats in Jacksonville. That's why they were prepared to make the commitment to London that they did. So I think there is a bit of a premium on that. They probably have to roll the dice a little bit more than others. But this is going to come down to Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence taking that next step, because ultimately, if he can take the next step, then he's going to make those guys look great. It won't matter what they're being paid. We know Peyton Manning got guys paid. Tom Brady has made guys very, very wealthy and made them household names. So it's the QB. I think that, to me, is the biggest piece for the Jags in 2022, is getting Trevor Lawrence to take that step to show that he really does belong in the upper echelons of the NFL where we expected him.
The Jags have done some really, I think, some decent signings, but again, it's all at a premium. Like Colin said, they brought in Darius Phillips from the Rams. He's a cornerback. He had a good season last year. 39 million is what's been speculated, big contract. And Brandon Sheriff has come in from Washington. He's really solid on the offensive line, on the back of them tagging Cam Robinson. But I touched on last week's show. For me, this now is more about what are they going to do with the draft. And when we spoke to James Palmer there last week, he still felt that they would go offensive line. I don't think that's the case now. I think it's Hutchinson all the way, because they've done so much to kind of solidify the offensive line in free agency. I don't see why they would come on and go with an offensive line again in the draft. And then Evan Ingram's come in. Again, he has good days and bad days. So they brought in some good players, but it's just the nature of the contracts and the manner of what they've spent. And will we see next year or the year after where ultimately it comes back to bite them, because we've seen in the past teams go so heavy in free agency and then they're left with these long-term contracts and the team still doesn't get themselves back to where they want to be.
So, gents, we should have announced, I should have announced at the start, I do apologise, you'll see it on the tag at the bottom, we have also opened up a TikTok account. I'm not entirely sure what TikTok is. I definitely don't think I'm the target demographic, but we have one. There is a jersey giveaway when we hit 1,000 followers on TikTok. So if you know what it is or want to learn what it is, sign up to TikTok and follow us on TikTok, because basically it's short vinaigrettes. It's smaller, shorter videos. So think of it, if it goes over 7 seconds, you're already too long thinking time for someone like Jimmy Garoppolo or most of the quarterbacks in the league. Sometimes it can go longer, so you can be like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, extending the play. But frankly, once it goes past 4 seconds, some would say that's too long thinking time and processing time for Jimmy Garoppolo to make accurate and correct decisions. Others will defend Jimmy Garoppolo and say that in a system, he's an accurate quarterback. He can make key throws in the third down, but he'll forever be haunted by a Super Bowl he could have, and Kyle Shanahan could have, and probably should have won. The Jimmy G question, though, and we touched on it at the start, the Baker Mayfield question, feel like they're going to haunt the league for the next few months, though. I mean, let's be grateful. At least we resolved the Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, and Deshaun Watson hangovers that were looming over the league for the next while. Guys, just, give me 10 seconds. Like, give me your best guess. Where are they going to end up to start the 2022 NFL league season?
Want to go first, Colin?
Lost the ball there quickly, didn't you?
I think Jimmy G is probably the Colts. I don't know if the Colts will go for Baker. It just feels more Jimmy G type situation, given what Jim Irsay. Ultimately, he seems to be the man making the decisions there. So to me, that's probably where Jimmy G goes. The Baker one, I don't know. There's been very little movement that we've heard, in terms of Baker over the weekend, in terms of teams who may be interested, but maybe they're trying to suss it out, and maybe they feel that with Watson in there now and with Jacoby Brissett in there, that ultimately the Browns are really going to have to kind of almost give Baker away. So teams may sit on their hands a little bit and wait and see and feel if they were to pick him up. Imagine, if you're a team that essentially is wondering what do you do, and you get Baker for a fifth or a sixth and you run it for a year, maybe that's what a team will be willing to do. But we know Mr. O'Leary's thoughts on Baker. So where is he going to be playing in September, Brian?
I think he'll be playing in Seattle. Colin, made some very good points last week. Maybe the week prior when we discussed the Russell Wilson deal, did we really think Pete Carroll would be ready to do a rebuild at his age? I think this will give them an opportunity to continue to challenge, not necessarily to win the division, but be very competitive. And I think Baker Mayfield would probably be a better fit to go into Seattle than to go somewhere else where he's what's the right word? He's spiky. Is that fair? He gets aggressive with the media, so I certainly don't think he'd do well in New York, because I think he'd fall out of love with them pretty quickly. But Seattle might be the right place. Jimmy G is not going to get traded to Seattle. Okay, they're in the division. I don't think they'd even want them anyway. But from his point of view, I think he's going to be put in a position where he's no choice but to go to Indianapolis, but he will be going there with kind of hesitation, because is it the same scenario in 12 months if they don't make the playoffs? Like Jim actually tends to come out with some really wild statements at the end of the season. He wouldn't even meet with Carson Wentz. Is Jimmy G looking at this going, am I going to be in the same position in 12 months if I get the team within a game of the playoffs? Like they lost the game against the Jags. It wasn't all on Carson Wentz. The offensive line didn't manage that game at all very well. They had a real letdown. He copped a lot of the flack. I know he didn't play well for large parts of the season, but he ultimately was the one who took it all. And they got rid of him. Jimmy G will be going, okay, we've just seen what he's done to a veteran quarterback in the league. Am I going to be in the same position in 12 months? Probably not, because I think he's better. He's much better than Carson Wentz, but it's a risky one. I still think Baker for Seattle.
Every time you say Jimmy G so many times, I just keep remembering Timberland with that song talking about Jimmy G. Anyway, that's beside the point. I hasten to add, Brian Grigson's been very busy in the Colts. 5 years in a row, 5 different starting quarterbacks. I happen to agree that with Colin, though, I think Jimmy G to Colts makes too much sense. And Brian, I don't want to agree with you, but I can't help but thinking Baker Mayfield to Seattle makes so much sense as well. Short man syndrome. They used to a shorter quarterback out there with Russell Wilson days. But I'd love to just throw a random one in there. I reckon Winston's going back to the Saints. But imagine the Saints took a flyer on another quarterback coming back from shoulder surgery, like they did on Drew Brees back in the day, and they therefore build up a new dynasty in New Orleans. I don't think it's going to happen for multiple reasons, including the fact that this quarterback is Baker Mayfield rather than Drew Brees. But it would be interesting to see in relation to it. Stephen just brought a comment there as well, agreeing with us on Jimmy G and the Baker piece in relation to it. But Jameis Winston is in the mix to Carolina too.
I was just about to call them out. We haven't even suggested Carolina. Like they're not comfortable with Sam Darnold, so something has to give there.
Nobody's comfortable with Sam Darnold, but do they know what they're doing in Carolina, to be fair? Because do you think Matt Rule has a clue?
Well, I thought he was a good head coach. I don't think it's all down to him, but it's the contract. They took the 5th-year option on Sam Darnold last year. It made no sense. Like, we're in the same position. Let the quarterback play on his final year. If he has a good season and he proves himself, you give him the contract then. To take the 5th-year option without seeing anything from him on the field was crazy. They could have been walking away from Sam Darnold now. Now they're tied into him. Even if they do go quarterback in the draft, which they may do at 6, they might decide to reach for one of these guys and just take a chance that they can be the ones that take over. But they're in a difficult spot.
So, James, I'm going to throw out something. We actually, another deal we should have, just want to mention in passing. We talked lovely Colleen Wolfe during the week. She's obviously a big Eagles fan. We mentioned about their moves at pass rusher. They re-signed Fletcher Cox as well, which is good for them, seeing as it looked like he was moving elsewhere for a period of time. So good news for the Eagles in that regard. But I've got to throw this up. Fred put in a question to us just on the chat there. And I want to throw it to you guys. Let's imagine for a second, you're like Dave Ziegler in the Raiders here, obviously throwing money around a little bit. You're like Brandon Beane, obviously building up the Bills. Colin, I'll come to you first. If you're the owner of a pro team, are you going to put 20% of your yearly wages in the salary cap era to a quarterback, knowing that if he gets injured, proper goose is beautiful. Right? I love the eloquence of it all. But, this could apply to a Russell Wilson, not necessarily in this year, but in the outer years of his deal. Aaron Rodgers, obviously, in the redeal he's done. And obviously, Deshaun Watson with the amount of guaranteed money after this first year, which is a bit artificial, will come in. Also applies to Patrick Mahomes in latter years, Josh Allen in latter years of their deals, where unless they restructure, it's a big portion of the salary cap. So let's play GM for a bit. We play head coaches, we play players. Let's play GM for a minute. How would you construct your team, Colin? And is that a viable team building concept as far as you're concerned?
You have to pay a QB because I'm a fan of a team that tried running it with anybody at QB for the past 6 years, and look what happened. So to me, if you don't have a QB, forget about it. You can get by for a year or two if you have a Kyle Shanahan and the Mike McDaniel and an incredible kind of run game, brilliant defense, and everything goes your way. Yeah, but even then, you can't get fully over the hump. Yeah, if you have a legendary leader like Peyton Manning, sure, but otherwise, you have to have. The game has become more and more about the QB. And actually, Stephen Holder had a really interesting piece about this last week, where he talked about how the NFL has almost kind of created a monster in which QBs are so important now, right? That teams will do kind of almost anything to get them and anything to placate them and keep them happy. But obviously, a QB on a rookie deal is ideal, and that's what you want. But if your QB isn't on it, then you have to go get it. Say, and that goes right. We've seen the second-year QBs take off in recent years, win MVP, Mahomes, Lamar, etc. But also look last year at the Rams. Sean McVay didn't believe in Jared Goff, so he went and got Matthew Stafford, and they were able to put the pieces around him. Unless you have a QB, you don't have anything. And the Bengals are another example. Like the Bengals, what a turnaround in having Joe Burrow. So to me, yeah, is it ideal? No, but I think you have to do it, because I've been on the other side of not doing it, and the results are not pretty, not fun, and not at all entertaining.
I think the GMs are forced to do it in a way because I think essentially the model in which every team tries to work off is nowadays with the cap is that you get a quarterback in the draft who's within 2 or 3 years he's a classic quarterback, the likes of Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and you win the Super Bowl during that period, because you've paid him very little in the grand compared to other players, and then you get players around him who are obviously on the bigger contracts, and they obviously complement each other and they go and win the Super Bowl. Colin was right. The Rams model did work. They got to a Super Bowl, but they didn't fulfill their potential and win that Super Bowl against the Patriots. And he was out of his depth in that game. Let's be fair. Like we've always discussed how Flores and Belichick literally called perfect game against the Rams that night. They quickly addressed that, gave it another year. It didn't work. The Chiefs have been fortunate. They've done it, before Mahomes got the big contract, but then they lost the Super Bowl. So, yeah, I think you need to be. I don't like the way some of the contracts are going now. I'm not sure that's the right way, but certainly in proportion it has to go. I'm with Colin. Look, the Giants are 5 years now with Jones, and nothing has improved. They'll give him another go, and that'll be the end of it. But it's still 5 years where they haven't been in the playoffs, and there's numerous teams in the league in the same position. So if you don't have a quarterback, I still think offensive line is also one of the major compliments. I think as we've seen in the last few weeks, the Bengals have quickly recognized how was getting to the Super Bowl. They struggled throughout the course of the season, and they've 3 players signed within the space of a week proves that point. But if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have anything.
Yeah, Fred, I'm just going to add, I agree entirely. You say you're proper goose. Unfortunately, the quarterbacks are the goose that lays the golden egg. And if you get them on a rookie deal, happy days. But ultimately, you got to pay to play, and you got to pay these guys to be in the game. As you would know, with the Cowboys paying Dak Prescott, for example, as well. So I think, unfortunately, it's a necessity of life in the NFL. Sometimes you're going to have to pay a lot. I mean, even if that is making a move to bring in a quarterback who's only won 1 playoff game in 5 years, I suppose that's better than nothing when your team hasn't won any playoff games or even made the playoff games in the last 5 years. But I can't imagine what team I could be referring to there. Before we round up, guys, I mean, just a general sense, and obviously, look, we could do best deal, worst deal. There are so many to pick from. There are so many bizarre things. I mean, I think my feelings on the Carson Wentz deal from the point of view of the Commanders in that regard. But I'm actually fascinated with another development that's kind of seemed to be more prevalent this year than it has in others. There have been a number of deals that have fallen through, or the players have actually changed their minds fundamentally. I mean, we've had Randy Gregory announced effectively for 2 different teams. It happened as well with a player for the Ravens. I can't think of the name at the moment, actually, as well. But we've also had greater proliferation of almost players announcing their intentions and playing the game on social media. I know it's always been there, but for some reason it just felt a little bit bigger this year. It felt a little bit stronger. It felt like, I'm always a big advocate that the teams really hold the power, and ultimately under the collective bargaining agreement, the players have, sold their souls in that regard for at least the next 9 years under new TV deals. But there is a degree of player power being exercised through social and through trying to exercise a bit of control. Am I alone in feeling this, or do you feel that it's taken a new dynamic this season?
I think it has, and I think the fact that we have quarterbacks even being traded, like, would that have happened 5 years ago? Whatever you think about the, Deshaun Watson and all of that goes on there, and but the way in which I suppose the media narrative can no longer be totally controlled, right? Because players have the ability to give their say. And we've seen that. Randy Gregory coming out this evening, being very vocal that he feels Jerry Jones was dishonest. And that's an interesting one, but that's directly from the man himself. So I'm sure the Cowboys will have plenty to say when it comes to that. But even potentially, the talk, I suppose, over the last couple of days on Twitter has been the fact that Baker Mayfield put out that statement that was a goodbye to the Browns, that he essentially said, no, I'm not, you said you wanted an adult. Well, go find one. I'm not going to play for you anymore. Zed Smith was the one for the Ravens, and JD McKissick, obviously the Bills, very unhappy with the way that played out. If anyone saw the press conference, so I think the way in which players can interact, but as I mentioned earlier in the show, I did see plenty of fans of teams where it didn't, players have moved on or players didn't accept a contract, talk about players being disloyal, but how much loyalty is there from organization towards players? I mean, I think the cards are stacked heavily in favor of the teams. So I completely understand the individual players wanting to make the most of their particular situations.
I think the league may need to look at how this tampering period works, because it doesn't work really, because like free agency was due to start on the 16th, essentially it started on the 14th, because all the major deals, and this is the same every year, this isn't like a one-off, all the deals, but then probably this was the first year in a long time where we've seen so many deals fall apart when they're after being announced. And then I thought, well, I touched on a column last week, it was unusual to see the teams start to tweet out that they've agreed to deal with a player. And I thought some people even respond to the team going, sorry, is this not the tampering period? So essentially you're admitting that you're out there doing these deals, So I think the league might look at this, because it hasn't gone well for them in the last week with the deals that have fallen through. But it's been such an unusual one, because the week before felt like it was free agency already, with the trades, with the Russell Wilson one, Carson Wentz followed very quickly. Then obviously the Baker and the Deshaun Watson thing floating in the background. So it's been one of the busier and unusual periods, but I don't think the tampering period is doing the job it's supposed to do.
Yeah, but it's the legal tampering period, isn't it, Brian? That's
and then the illegal tampering period at the Combine.
The illegal tampering period, which happens for the other 364 days of the year. Yeah, exactly. I remember actually, I think it was MMQB back in the day, about 5 years ago, there was a bit of not an expose, but a discussion with an agent who was breaking down his experiences with two key players he had who were coming up to free agency the following season. And he basically documents it's like, ran into team X at the bar in week 7, ran into team Y in week 9, actually at the airport and things like that. And it was a bit of a dirty look at stuff we all know really goes on. So it always amazes me, of course, how they're able to announce that, these multi-million-dollar contracts, which run to tens of, or if not hundreds of pages, are able to be signed so quickly, because they're able to announce it like literally seconds after they're able to formally confirm the deals. So I mean, they must read really quickly. Is all I can say.
Yeah, I think Chase Edmonds was the first that was announced. Sorry, Mark, it was 4 o'clock our airtime last week, and it was announced at like 4:03. Chase Edmonds has gone to the Dolphins, per source.
And actually, talking about Chase Edmonds, I mean, Mike McDaniel, obviously, former 49ers offensive coordinator. The Dolphins have also announced Raheem Mostert is coming to the Dolphins on a free agency deal.
It's a good move. I like that move.
That's a really good move, but I've got this funny feeling the Dolphins might try and run the ball next year. I don't know why. It might have something to do with Mike McDaniel and his entire offensive game plan, but it's just an inkling that's coming up there. So load up on DTs in the AFC East as well if you're playing the Dolphins next year. But guys, there are literally so many deals, so many things we haven't touched on. Chris Godwin re-upping with the Buccaneers. He was going to play on the tag. That's obviously giving them a bit of cap room, committed to them longer term. So they've got Godwin and Evans locked down for a bit longer, which is obviously good again in that space. But there's so many angles and ways and things we can talk about in relation to free agency for the upcoming season. Nobody won the Super Bowl in March, though, so there's a long, long way to go. But before we roll up tonight, any further thoughts, any other comments, observations you'd like to share before we go in peace to love and serve the NFL?
Well, there's some news in that Terran Armstead is headed to Miami tomorrow, and it looks like they might get that deal done. Obviously, we talked with Sam Monson quite a bit about the almost historically bad O-line play from the Dolphins last year. And Brian talked earlier in the show about how teams are, really looking to address O-line issues this in free agency. You saw the Bengals, despite how good Burrow is and taking advantage, but they need to keep him around. You don't want to do what the Colts did to Andrew Luck, where you have a generational talent and ultimately he gets so beat up that he decides he's had enough. So that's an interesting one also, given how good he is. That would be huge, I think, for the Dolphins. I think you're going to see obviously a brand new offensive scheme there. I am really interested to see what McDaniel can do and how he transitions. Can he make the transition from OC to HC? If he can, they could be one who could be potentially sneaky good. But obviously there's another investigation to play out in Miami with their owner. So there's all sorts to happen in the NFL, and I have no doubt that we are in for another surprise or two in the week ahead.
I'll finish on the NFC East. So, like from a Giants perspective, I didn't expect any snazzy moves or any big moves. There's no money to play with, but where it took where the previous GM didn't address the offensive line for 5 years, the new GM has come in and signed 4 players from offensive line, 2 from Buffalo, which wasn't a surprise. I always felt he'd go back and take players from there, and one really strong one from the Colts. So that was good. But the fascinating story for the NFC East people is the Cowboys, because it just doesn't seem like everything is right there. Cooper was traded. Obviously, that was a salary dump. Collins is gone. Randy Gregory's fiasco last week, he's gone to Denver. There's a few other players that have moved on, and the Cowboys haven't brought in a lot. So from a team that's just won the division, they don't seem to have made a step up in terms of what I would have thought they'd do in free agency to complement the team that they already have. So it'd be interesting to see where they go in the draft.
And the draft is going to soon be underway. We'll be back, obviously, every week between now and then with you on a weekly basis. We've got a few interviews lined up, and we'll be building up to our draft coverage. When I'm sure we're going to do something stupid like stay up all night for the first round again, because that was so wonderful last year and didn't kill any of us whatsoever. But look forward to being with you all for that, gents. Thank you, everyone, for watching, for your comments and things like that. Guys, in the first week, it's, the same old thing, isn't it? AFC West are loading up like Reagan and Khrushchev during the 80s on weapons. And we've got the Browns doing extensive due diligence. And I think they've just been contacted by the Premier League, who want that same extensive due diligence to be applied on their investigations going forward. But that's all for this week. We're sure to be back next week with more fun and games in the NFL. Until then, it's a thanks again to our sponsors, Trust.com, MiniArcadeSystems.com, and of course the Aer Lingus College Football Classic coming up this August. Colin, Brian, it's been a pleasure as always, gents.
Thank you.
Iowa.